In President Obama's recent State of the Union address, he talked about cutting back on the use of controversial drones overseas. Now, this is a story that often flies under the radar, but some reports indicate that U.S. drones killed nearly 900 people recently in targeted airstrikes. Now, here in the U.S., several activists are protesting and pushing for the military to cut back on these drone strikes. One of the most notable voices in that movement, Kathy Kelly. She's facing a 3-month prison sentence after her recent protest at a U.S. Air Force base. Kathy joins us from Chicago. It's great to have you back with us.
Well, thank you very much.
Now, Kathy, you recently went to an Air Force base in Missouri, Whiteman Air Force Base, I believe. You had a message, you said, from people that you spoke with in Afghanistan. For our audience, what was that message in particular, and what was your mission on that day?
Well, our young friends in Afghanistan regularly tell us, please, tell your government, tell your parents of children, don't send young people over here, and please don't fly planes without pilots overhead. This brings more warfare to us. We can't escape. We're trapped. But could you go and bring that message to your government? Well, I have a constitutionally protected right. The First Amendment gives the right for people to assemble peaceably for redress of grievance. So I had a loaf of bread, a group of friends, and one very fine activist from Kansas City, Missouri, Georgia Walker, and we two crossed a line and attempted to deliver our letter and our loaf of bread to the base commander at Whiteman Air Force Base. Our thought was that this letter could help familiarize him with international law about extrajudicial assassinations or drone warfare as well.
So we're showing B-roll just a minute ago, video of you at that Air Force base, and there's the caution tape there. There's that whole day. Now the aftermath, and of course we've learned recently that you have a 3-month prison sentence waiting ahead of you for that day. Was there anything about that day that you might do differently if you could?
Oh, I don't think so. I certainly was pleased that the number of people who came all the way from Kansas City had joined with us. If there had been some way to do more outreach in Knob-Master, Missouri, and help people who are neighbors of the base understand how that property is being used.
And in many ways, you're right. This is also, I think, in some ways gaining a little bit more attention to the story itself. But you, maybe unlike a lot of activists, aren't just someone who goes in the streets of America. You've also been in Iraq. You've been in Lebanon. You've been in Gaza. You've been in Afghanistan. You've seen a lot of things, haven't you?
Well, I certainly am persuaded that warfare is always a hideously wrongful pursuit. There are all kinds of other ways that we can solve problems without deciding that we're going to blow things up, tear bodies apart, and inflict terror on other people.
And that's one of the key issues at stake here. You know, we've heard a lot about American values in recent days coming out of our nation's capital. Let's talk about that for just a minute. We claim to waive the standard of peace, yet at the same time our military kills hundreds of innocent civilians in these drone strikes. We also claim to be the land of the free, yet at the same time our country jails more people in total and in ratio, in percentages, than any other country around the world. Of course, you yourself are about to experience prison firsthand. What do you think yourself as an American citizen when you hear that phrase, American values? What does that mean to you?
Well, lately it's immediately called to mind American exceptionalism, that the United States has been coached, almost bullied and pushed and lured into valuing U.S. lives over the lives of other people, as if somehow we are exceptionally moral and anybody who doesn't agree with us is a villain. And that's a kind of a cartoonized version of the world, and I don't think it equips us to share this planet with other people. In fact, I think it jeopardizes the safety of people in the United States. I think that people in the United States, by and large, do value generosity and sharing, and would even be willing to simplify their lifestyles a bit, maybe with some advice about how to go about that. But there is a constant refrain that says that if we engage in violence, it has to be virtuous. I mean, apparently this film, American Sniper, that's been a big box office hit, is trying to give justification for the war in Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We were lied to. False information was gained through torture in order to help justify that war. Already 500,000 children had been killed by economic sanctions. It was just a hideous blot stain on the history of the United States, and yet still mass media will consume bald-faced lies about the United States going to that war.
Is there a mindset in Western culture that explosions and airstrikes maybe aren't so bad if they happen in some other remote part of the world? Because I see this thing, when they happen in our most beloved cities, Paris, New York, Ottawa, it's hard for a lot of people, I think, to resist these strong feelings of emotion, fear, patriotism, even maybe revenge. You mentioned that in the American Sniper movie. That's a hot topic right now. A lot of people sort of piling onto this feeling of revenge, seeing an American sniper take out other enemies of the state, if as it were. It's hard to get inside of the mind of a terrorist. I won't ask you to do that, but do you feel that might be what part of this is about? Do you feel terrorist attacks are more based in retribution for those American drones?
Oh, well, I think that there are many, many reasons why people in other parts of the world could feel anger and resentment and fear and terror. I also, though, have been wanting lately to remind myself that the same mindset that can say this person might be a threat to the United States, we're not sure, we don't know, we're not sure how we could prove it, we can't capture the person, we'll just kill the person. We won't bring the person in for interrogation. We'll just kill this person on a doubt, on a suspicion. But when you think about why people in the Black Lives Matter campaigns are so passionately committed to occupying the streets, they want to say that the same mindset is being applied to a black man walking down the street with Eric Garner, with Michael Brown. This person might be a threat to somebody's security. And the officer isn't sure, but goes ahead and pumps 7 bullets, the 7th of which killed Michael Brown.
There's no doubt that a man who carries a gun, whether it's for his profession, he's calibrated for a response. He's trained to use it, and in many cases, they do. Let's shift our attention for a moment to Paris. We saw these recent attacks. Of course, they started over that angry response to the satirical cartoon newspaper. You recently mentioned it actually just in this interview, also in an article you have out there that implied maybe American people buy into some sort of caricature or cartoon of heroes and villains. Can you help us narrow down, what did you mean by that specifically, the caricature part of what American people buy into?
Well, I think very often our foreign policy is predicated on threat and force, and the way to sell it is to persuade the U.S. people that there's some kind of humanitarian value to what we're doing because we're eliminating the bad guys.
But isn't this more on the other side of this argument? It's more than just a cartoon. I mean, we have video evidence showing us of someone in Paris walking up to a person on the street, cold-blooded, and shooting him down with an assault rifle right there. Isn't that a little bit more difficult to overcome than just a cartoon?
Well, I think when I say cartoons, what I want to say is that we conceive of ourselves as the good guys. We forget that we've decimated entire villages in Afghanistan, in Iraq. We've burst into homes with our night raids. We've captured and tortured and imprisoned and held without charge hundreds of people. That we have been the ones who have been regarded by Poles all around the world as the most threatening, dangerous force in the world. We've amassed hundreds and hundreds of nuclear weapons that we are now also making available to other countries, like we've helped Israel acquire the nuclear bomb. We're always seeing ourselves as the good guys. And yes, it is true, there are people who have psychopathic desires to shoot guns and kill other people, but many times when those people find one another and form non-state armed groups, they have more reasons to want to fight against an enemy than a young person in the United States who maybe didn't get a very good education and can't find a job and would like to get out of town and find some adventure. So I want to say that these cartoonized versions of reality, I think, prompt people in the United States to exalt and glorify anybody in a U.S. police force or in the U.S. military wearing a uniform. We want them to be our shiny, valorous heroes. But it doesn't always work that way. In fact, very often, we ought to be asking ourselves, why do 22 combat veterans commit suicide every day in the United States?
Certainly a lot of social issues to address in this country. Also, of course, foreign policy. That's going to be a big focus in this country over the span of the next 24 months, moving toward the 2016 presidential elections, of course. Now, back to this country here, a lot of people feel very heavily invested in the argument for the reasons of love of country. And, you know, I, for one, can understand that. There are husbands, brothers, sons, daughters, relatives of us out there, all putting their lives on the line in our military. The red, white, and blue, those are some very important colors to a lot of people in this country. They invoke a lot of passion, a lot of patriotism. Is it possible to call yourself an American patriot and at the very same time stand against an aggressive, violent foreign policy?
Well, of course it's possible. I mean, go back to Thomas Paine, my country is the world. My religion is to do good. Think of Mark Twain, one of the most beloved writers in the United States, and he was vehement in his opposition to United States wars of aggression. There have been many, many people in the United States, Jane Addams sailing on a boat in an effort to try to meet with other women to stop the abuses as World War I became more inevitable. Of course, there are people who have been, and may I especially say Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who have been aligned with the cause of saying that killing other people is wrong and there are other ways to resolve problems. I think it's highly unpatriotic and spiteful and contemptuous of American values to try to sell or market violence to young people who perhaps haven't had a chance to gain the experience and wisdom that comes with being able to live on this planet for decades, but to manipulate those young people into thinking that war is a game and they can have fun with video games and with being enamored of possible adventures abroad and be the person who pulls the trigger to save lives. This is a very cynical and dangerously manipulative practice.
Now, also, you've got an article up on a website, Voices for Creative Violence. I like that title there.
Let's stop a moment. Voices for Creative Nonviolence.
Creative Nonviolence. Do you feel that these Islamic jihadists are ready to sit down and talk about a creative solution?
It's very hard to know the profiles of who the people are right now that are fighting in Islamic jihadist groups. One thing I could suggest is that it's useful and helpful to look at the profile of Ali Baghdadi, the self-styled head of the caliphate under the Islamic State. I happen to myself have gone to the Buqa camp in Iraq where he spent 4 years, and he said that's where he did his recruitment. That's how he organized people. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, are some of the people who decided to pick up guns and fight in a group like Islamic State, or Islamic State in Syria, Islamic State in Levant, people who themselves had experienced abuses and great terrors? With regard to Iraq, were any of them the fathers, the brothers, the cousins, the uncles of some of the children? And I saw them. I was at their bedsides again and again. Little children whose lives were ended because they were brutally punished by economic sanctions. So I think that before we just presume that there's some threatening horde that could alter our lives, let's remind ourselves that the greatest dangers we face are the dangers caused by acid rain, by nuclear weapon proliferation, by alcohol, firearms, and tobacco production in our country, by the people in our country who deplete the resources, engage in fracking, and have shown that they don't give a good gosh darn what happens to Mother Earth.
And Kathy, believe it or not, at one time in this nation, we were considered around the world a country that was reluctant to go to war. That many years ago now, and I don't know that we still have the same perspective in the eyes of our friends around the world. But Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspective with us, rather. And we're glad to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
That Kathy Kelly joining us via Skype here on WHDT. Up next, we have our special reports. Also, Amanda Gabriel with our Daily Digital.